The Art Dealer Diaries are brought to you by Medicine Man Gallery, located for over 26 years in Tucson, Arizona, specializing in antique Native American art, early Western art, including the famed Maynard Dixon, as well as modern art. You can find everything online at medicinemangallery.com. There's over 6,000 objects to select from. Also, the Charles Bloom Murder Mystery Series, written by yours truly, me, Mark Sublette. There's 6 books in this series, and they follow the protagonist Charles Bloom through all the intrigue of the art world set in Santa Fe and the Navajo Nation. These can be found on Audible, eBooks, Amazon, and of course, the gallery at medicinemangallery.com. Great podcast today with Brian Lebel. This guy is a very interesting cat. I think you're going to find it just as unique as anything I've done. This is an individual who literally started on his own dealing in antiques at 14, moved out, very successful, goes and becomes a cowboy, and I mean a real cowboy, and then gets into the Western art business and turns out to be maybe the top dealer in this field in the world. And we talk about interesting things like a $2 million Billy the Kid photograph. So if you want to know about the Old West and hear a very compelling story, stay tuned for Brian Lebel. I've got Brian Lebel. I grabbed him today out of a booth. He's very busy. He's setting up his show for the objects in Santa Fe. And I said, Brian, please come and talk with me. And he did. So I'm going to find out all about Brian Lebel, who owns a wonderful auction house, Brian Lebel Auction House, and he also owns the High Noon Auction House. And we're going to get into those and what that's all about. But I want to find out, first of all, thank you for coming, Brian.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, well, I think you're an important mover and shaker in this community, and you're one of the top dealers, if not the top dealer, in Western art. And when I say Western, I really mean saddles, spurs, history, things that are related to the Old West. And if you have those kind of objects, you're going to probably end up finding Brian's name out there. And so we're going to find out how he got into that and why he got into that and why I didn't, for good reason.
Because you're smart.
Maybe, I don't know, because I didn't know enough. Still don't. So tell me, Brian, where did you grow up?
Massachusetts.
Of course, all good cowboy dealers who came from Massachusetts.
Exactly.
And so did you, literally your whole primary, secondary, tertiary school was in Massachusetts?
Yep. Then I ran away from home to become a cowboy.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And so when did you run away from home?
When I was 22.
And so growing up in Massachusetts, where did you grow up anyway?
In Chicopee.
I don't know where that is.
It's right outside of Springfield.
How'd you get rid of that accent? You don't have one.
Didn't have one.
Yeah.
Never had one.
Did your parents, were they from Massachusetts?
They were, but they were from the eastern part of the state, so they had a little bit one, yeah.
And what did your mom and dad do?
My mother worked at Smith & Wesson. My father was a baker.
Interesting. And so did you learn any of those baking skills?
No. None.
Did he have his own shop?
No, he worked for Wonder Bread.
So he had a good corporate job.
Yep.
That he liked. And I bet when you ran away to be a cowboy, he thought, this may not be what you should be doing, son.
Exactly, yeah.
And maybe in more terms. Tell me about that. What was that like?
I just went out to Cody, Wyoming, fell in love with it, went back to Smith & Wesson, gave 2 weeks notice, and moved to Cody. Took a job on a ranch.
And how old were you at that time?
22.
So you went through high school. Did you go to college at all?
No college.
So you got out of high school, and did you like art or anything, history and all that stuff when you were growing up as a kid?
I started doing antique shows when I was 12.
Really?
And I started setting up at them when I was 14.
Wow. So what were you collecting at 12 and doing it? And was this by yourself?
Yeah. I was by myself. I had moved out of the house early.
At 12?
At 14.
Oh, my gosh.
And
why was that? If you can say.
I can, because my parents smoked and I couldn't take it and they wouldn't quit, so I left.
Yeah.
So that was
seems totally reasonable to me. Exactly. So you move out on your own at 14, but 2 years before that you are starting to already do antique shows.
Well, I only lived about 12 miles from Brimfield.
So for those who don't know, at Brimfield, it's like the greatest antique show on earth, and it's twice a year?
3 times.
Was it 3 times a year at that time as well?
It still is, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So you kind of grew up going through the fields of Brimfield?
Yep, I did.
And what drew you in at a 12-year-old? Comics?
No, I was mostly guns.
Yeah, and you knew something because your mom worked at Smith & Wesson.
Right.
So you understood guns.
Yeah.
And what kind of gun? And so you could just go through there and buy a gun at 12?
Yeah, and I started learning about antique guns, and back then it was when people would take you under their wing and teach you. Mm-hmm. And I had a good friend of mine that just passed away, J.R. LaRue, that when I was 14, he drove me to gun shows and taught me things.
And so you would look for old Colts or?
Yep, I did Colts and Winchesters. Those were my anything Western, because I wanted Western. And do you remember
when you bought that first Colt or your first gun?
Well, mostly the first good real gun I ever bought was, I was 14 and I went to an auction in New Hampshire and bought a bunch of about $600 worth of Winchesters. There was 6 of them at the time, and I went to try to buy them at the auction house, and they told me I was too young. So somebody else stood up and bought them for me and handed them to me outside in the parking lot.
Did you have to pay him a little something for doing that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, what did you have to give him? Do you remember?
No, I think it was $50. And
that's a lot.
It was. It
was
a lot of money.
Where do you get $650 as a kid that age?
I was already working. I was managing a movie theater, so I had that was my tax refund.
Wow. So you took all the money that you earned working at a theater, and what were you doing at the theater?
I was managing the theater.
Wow, and this is at like 12 or 14?
Yeah, $1.25 an hour.
Yeah, and so you took everything that you had earned the entire year, and you took that, and you turned it into, how many guns was it?
6.
6, and you, for $650, 600 plus the kick to the guy who would do it. And then, so what did you do with the guns?
I went to a gun show, and I ended up with 12 guns after that. And
so did you trade them off, or did you?
Yeah, traded them off and got other things and just continued.
So you would take 6, turn it to 12, 12, 24, make money. And how long did it take you from when you started doing this? So you say goodbye theater?
Oh, about 2 years.
Yeah. So you kept working at the theater, even though you were buying and selling.
It was fun.
Yeah. And so are you a film buff? I mean,
I was. Yeah. I am still, but not as much.
Westerns,
I don't have time
I'm
for
assuming?
it anymore. No, actually not.
That's funny. Now that's funny because he also sells Western memorabilia.
Well, because they haven't just made a lot of good Westerns lately, so it's kind of
So tough. What kind of movies did you like or do you like?
It's across the board. I can't narrow that down.
Yeah.
But
you were somehow kind of drawn into that just because of your profession, what you were doing as a kid?
Basically, yeah. And I had always loved the cowboy stuff. Just, you like everybody else, you grow up watching Roy and Gene on Saturday morning, and so, I went to a gun show in Albany, New York, and bought a pair of spurs.
Uh-huh. How old were you when you did that?
I was about 15.
And what kind of spurs are they?
Mexican spurs.
Old 1870s kind of things?
About 1900.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought they were cool.
And what year would have that been in?
Approximately. I'd say approximately 68, 67, somewhere in there.
And you were 14?
Yeah, I'm trying to do the math.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's easier for me than you. And so you buy the spurs for, what does a pair of Mexican spurs cost back then?
I traded about $100 worth of stuff for them.
That was a lot for those spurs.
It was.
Overpaid?
They're worth right now about $100.
Yeah. So you started.
I still have them.
So you do you?
Yeah.
And is it because
they're the first pair I ever bought?
Yeah, smart. I hear this over and over again from dealers that kept the first thing that they bought and hung on to. I think it's a really wonderful thing when they do that. There's something there. Mm-hmm. The pull. Clearly you could have sold them a million times over and just pushed them on, but there is some thread there. I think you'd agree that you have to have those to show your beginning, kind of like the first dollar you earn.
I think it makes you feel good that, this is where you get started in this part of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you would start setting up at Brimfield at about 14 as well?
No, I waited until, I didn't set up in Brimfield until I was about 18, 19, right in there.
So before that, 14 to 18, you'd set up
gun shows. It was all gun shows.
And and it was pretty much at that time all guns that you were dealing in?
Yes.
Because you knew them, you understood them.
Right.
Did you get burned many times when you were first starting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, and that's got to be hard though when you're a kid. You're paying for your own, you're living on your own. Mm-hmm. Every cent counts. What were the lessons that you learned by doing that?
To not assume anything when it comes to dealing with people. There's some of the greatest people out there that don't look like they are, and some of the people that do look like they're the people you should be dealing with really aren't. And you get to know to accept people that can teach you things and to ask questions. And if people didn't answer my questions when I was at that age, I wouldn't be here today. So, there's 4 or 5 people that I can look back on and say that these people helped.
They gave you advice. And who would those? You mentioned the one individual, but
yeah, and there's and most of them have passed now. And Eddie Halbert from Winchester worked at Winchester, and another man that worked at Colt. And then when I got into the cowboy material, people like Ernie Hootenpile out of Oklahoma that would just sit and talk to you for hours and hours.
And say, here's what you got to learn, kid.
Yep. It's the same as, like now with what you do teaching people and watching your videos and things. It's identical to that, but these people would sit down back then and talk to you because we didn't have the vehicle that
there's no internet. There's nothing.
Yeah, so, I've learned everything about baskets and blankets by watching you. And back then, most people they're just few and far between anymore that want to teach you anything. Because when this became a business and the money got big, people were afraid if they taught you something, you'd steal their customer
or get the object and they don't have it.
Exactly.
Yeah, they look at it as proprietary information, and they're afraid to share knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame. I understand it, but I figured the more people know, the better our clients are, the more educated. Hopefully we can kind of get rid of some of the people that shouldn't be doing this kind of stuff and avoid the pitfalls. And we know there's a lot of pitfalls when you're buying any kind of art, Western, Indian, I don't care what it is, modernist, masters, everything. It all falls into the same group of buyer beware, and you need to educate yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
And you
see it every day.
Clearly have done that. I know many times I've called you on things. Western objects that I get that I think might be great or could be great. I don't have the knowledge. I usually can tell old. I can understand history. But sometimes I'm surprised and sometimes I'm disappointed. And I've had them both.
Yes.
And I will continue to have those. So you're 18 now, and that's when you started working at the gun factory?
Yep, a week after graduating from high school.
And what did you do there?
Odd jobs for a while, and then became a fitter, which is assembling and building guns.
And what kind of guns would that be?
Smith & Wesson revolvers.
And so that had to help you a lot, actually, in your business because you understood the mechanics of firearms and what has been messed with and not messed with.
And one thing it taught me that relates to, and working in a gun factory is very intriguing because of the things you learn in our business about people that claim things are absolute. This couldn't have ever been done this way because nobody ever did it. When you work in a place like that, you realize, pretty much everything could be done. You'd get a gun and somebody'd say, no, they didn't, never made it like that. And I'd say, yeah, they did, because I did while I was working there. And you learn those kind of things that people, especially in the gun business, that think they have something that is not right because there's a piece of it that's not normal. And that can relate to everything, whether it's a basket or a pot or a pair of spurs. When somebody says that Kelly Brothers never paid a pair of spurs with this big of a shank, why not?
Yeah. And maybe that day who was working on it was a guy who liked bigger shanks.
Or a guy who walked in and slipped the guy an extra $10 bill and said, make me these.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so how long did you work in the gun factory?
I was there for 8 years.
Oh, that's a long time.
Yeah.
A really long time. So from 18 until 26.
Yeah.
And you kind of worked your way up the ladder?
Yeah, 7 years.
Yeah, 7 years, 25.
Yeah.
So, or 26 is when you left?
Around 25, yeah. And that's when I started going back and forth to Wyoming.
So, and you worked your way up the post, when you were working in the factory, you got more and more expertise and probably were making more money and all that. And your mom was still working there?
Yeah. Yeah, she was.
So what was it that first trip you said, I'm going to go see what the West's all about?
I went to the Winchester Gun Show in Cody and fell in love with the town. And
easy to do.
Yeah, went back and decided to move there. Supplied my, I guess supported my habit of cowboy stuff by working as a gunsmith.
And so when you were working at Smith & Wesson, you were also doing gun shows, you were doing Brimfield, you were buying and selling on the side.
Yep.
And at that point when you decided to quit, had it surpassed, you were making more money doing the stuff on the side, or your interest was just greater?
I was making really good money at Smith & Wesson. I just didn't like the factory. I wasn't cut out to be in a factory.
Yeah, you couldn't be creative.
Right.
Yeah. And so what did your mom and dad say, especially your mom, when you said, I'm leaving, I'm going to Cody?
They didn't know what the hell I was doing, and it took them until the first time they saw me on television, they thought I was just a thief. They really didn't understand what I did for a living. I'm sure they thought I was a drug dealer or something.
Because you're making lots of money.
Right, yeah.
And who could do that for buying and selling old junk?
Yeah, because it was just old junk to them. Yeah, the first time I went to Brimfield with my mother, I saw a set of Catlin books that I wanted, and I pulled $600 in cash out of my pocket and handed it, and she grabbed it back, put it in my pocket, and said, "You need that to pay bills." And I said, "No, this is how business works.
I'm paying my bills."
Yeah, because people didn't understand. If they hadn't been in that position, if they've always been in a corporate world.
And so you put them back out and you got your books.
Yeah.
I'm sure she was
very surprising, yeah.
I'm sure she was very pleased with you as well. Yeah, I'm sure, when you have this good job and leaving, it had to have been difficult for them to...
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, they never understood it until they saw me, when they saw me on, I think it was the Learning Channel, there was a program on there, and it kind of legitimized what I was doing to a lot of people.
Yeah.
It was a different kind of life.
Very much
as
so.
You know.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, I mean, I had lots of people say, "What are you doing? You're leaving medicine to become an art dealer? Come on, what's that all about? That's weird." Greatest thing I ever did I enjoy it. And clearly you enjoy it too, because you've been doing this for 40 years probably. So when you go out to Wyoming, to Cody, what do you do there when you get out there?
I worked as a gunsmith and a sign painter. And
where'd you get the skill for the sign painting?
I didn't. I just started. I just decided I could do it, and I did. So.
And was it because of a financial, or you go, "I think I can do it," or it was fun and creative?
It was creative. Yeah. It was something I wanted to do.
Did you ever paint? Do you paint, or do you create art at all?
No.
Don't have that urge to itch?
No. I don't know. I just never did. Yeah.
Because you see people like John and Terry Moores, you know how good they are, and you go, "Oh my God!"
Yeah. Watching him yesterday, just drawing a Mickey Mouse while we're having lunch.
Yeah.
Is.
No, I know. They're so good. It is. I mean, I feel the same way. I haven't painted. I don't. It's just when you have great artists and you watch them, and they make it look easy, and of course it isn't. They've been doing it forever.
It's tough.
So you sign painted. You worked as a gunsmith. What does a gunsmith do exactly? I don't really
just repairs guns.
So somebody brings one in?
Yeah.
And so if somebody brought in an old one, would you go, we can repair it, but we could also probably buy this?
Exactly. Make them an offer.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a way to accumulate things that, people might not know that you always... the best thing to do in this business, of course, is tell somebody what they have.
Sure, of course.
So, of course, you tell somebody, you've got something great here, and I'd like to buy it, and see what they say. But a lot of people said, "No, I've been using this for the last 40 years, and I want to still use it, so fix it." And
a lot of those guys are using their guns for varmints or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
These are hand-me-downs that they've used. I know my grandfather had a .22 that went to my dad, to me, and those kind of things. Not valuable, but used. And so how long did you stay in the sign business and the smith business?
Not very long. I got a job on with an outfitter guiding fishing trips and hunting trips, and did that for quite a while, quite a few years.
How long? A couple of years? More than a couple?
Well, yeah, probably 8 years.
That's
total.
a long time.
And
did you know how to fish? I mean,
oh yeah. I grew up doing all that stuff, and I went out there and got a guide's license, became a guide, and did that. Went to work on running the horses on a famous ranch outside of Cody, and the collector, Larry Laram, who owned the ranch, was one of the top Western collectors in the world, and he had every basket and pot and textile, original oil paintings at the ranch, and so I got to work on that ranch, and I got to walk around these buildings full of artifacts that were fantastic, and I just fell in love with them.
Wow. Now, what were you doing on the ranch?
A little bit of everything. Cleaning stalls, fixing fence, training horses, shoeing horses.
And so why did you take a job like that? It seems like it's a step down from smithing and that.
It's outside. It was outside.
So you just wanted it for the pure beauty and to be out there and be a cowboy. You were a cowboy, basically, right? You're fixing fences and that kind of stuff, too?
Doing
that's fine.
Everything, yeah.
And that's no fun. And so you work for this. It just so happens this guy is a great collector. And he has the best of the best, and all throughout the ranch. So you would spend your free times going through the ranch and looking at it?
Yeah. Yeah, and just learning about it and reading every book he had on it.
Did he come and talk to you at all about it?
No, he was dead at that point.
I see.
And the ranch was at that time owned by Brooks Brothers, and I was working there, and it was just a fun time and a learning experience, and really opened my eyes to a lot of different things. When you walk into a mess hall and there's an original Russell on the wall, and you have to learn what it is. And it was fun.
How long did it take you to realize, hey, the stuff that's on the walls where I'm eating is actually a $1 million painting?
Well, that's kind of what got me in the business. Was I was there one time and somebody bought a pair of spurs that I was wearing, and they paid me way too much money for them, which made me start wondering, what this market was, whether there was a real Western market. And having a background in antiques already, I got in the truck and started traveling to shows.
So they literally bought the spurs off your heels?
Yeah.
And they just came up and said, I'll pay you this, and you go, of course you said, yeah, I'll do it. But did some part of you go, uh-oh?
No, not really, because at that time, you trust people and you don't know what,
What were those spurs, do you know?
Yeah, it was a pair of Kelly Brothers, and he offered me $300 for them, and at the time I was making $350 a month. So it was an easy decision.
And what were they worth, do you think, at that time you bought them?
I think they were worth that.
Yeah, so he paid you a fair amount.
He did, yeah.
But now you've got $350 in your pocket, and you sold spurs, which you didn't. You were surprised, and so that kind of changed your trajectory at that point.
Yeah, I went out and spent the money on more cowboy stuff.
And what did you go buy?
I bought a pair of. I went to Billings, Montana, to an antique show and bought a pair of chaps, and I think they were like $100.
Is that the first time you'd bought chaps?
Yeah, it was, except for the ones I was using, except for the ones I was wearing, a pair of collectible
So how
ones.
did you know to buy those as being something of value versus a working pair?
I really didn't. I was taking a chance. And as you probably know, you learn most by buying something and making a mistake.
Yeah.
So I made a lot of mistakes.
Was that one?
But I learned a lot. No, that worked out fine.
Yeah, they did fine.
Yeah.
Did you go, I wonder if I can sell the ones I'm wearing? And did you?
No, I didn't. I still have those too.
You still have those too. And do they have value, or are they just working chaps?
Just working chaps.
They're working chaps. So at that point you said, okay, I think I can make a living doing this on Western material as long as I can find the material. And what kind of time frame was this? What years was this been in?
Well, getting into it full time was probably about in the early 80s. Was mid 80s, was because I opened my store in Cody in 87, so it would have been earlier than that, early 80s.
And that was really kind of the start of a lot of this great Western interest, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Was it right at about that
the heyday.
time?
Yeah, it was.
And there's books coming out, and when did High Noon start their operation? Do you know?
I started the show in Cody in June of 89, and they started in 88, so they started theirs January of 89. So it's 6 months after we started our show in Cody.
And so what did you go, so in 89 is when you also opened your store in Cody?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what did you decide you were going to deal in at that point?
Just pure cowboy. It was
anything that was
guns
related.
And spurs and chaps, saddles, hats. Anything cowboy.
And where, because the internet wasn't going, you didn't have any internet, where were you finding that kind of material? Word of mouth?
Mostly on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I was still doing Brimfield. Brimfield 3. The best saddle I've ever found came out of Brimfield.
What was that?
It was a J.S. Collins in brand spanking new condition.
And what did you remember? Can you tell us about that when you found it? That's always I think exciting.
It was hanging in a barn, and a guy told me about it at the show, and I said, "Go get it and bring it back to me. I'll pay you." And he brought it back, and it's on the front cover of a couple of books now. And the best pair of spurs I ever found was at Brimfield, and people like where I worked at Valley Ranch. There was a dude ranch for wealthy people. And everybody that went there had gone to Harvard or Princeton, and it was owned by Laram and the Brooks Brothers, and they brought all these wealthy people out from New York. And they would come out, buy spurs, buy chaps, buy saddles. The best. Very
didn't
best.
Get used
and
much.
They'd take it back home, and they'd take it back to Connecticut or Massachusetts and put it in a storage. And I went back there and put signs out saying that's what I was buying, and people would say, "I got something in the garage."
And would you go around Brimfield and put up signs or tell people? How did you do that?
No, I just go around, hand out my card, and,
Yeah.
and I set up, and people got to know me.
Yeah, and they knew you were honest and would pay a good price, and that you were buying this stuff that it was just kind of taking off, really, I think, as price structure-wise, wasn't it, at that time?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It was a learning process. We didn't know, we had to guess at what somebody would pay for something. And you tried to be fair with people. And, the first time, the gentleman that I was telling you about, J.R. LaRue, he lived in Maine at the time, and he was at a gun show in Maine, and he called me and he said, we're at a gun show here, and we have a belt and holster that nobody wants, and they want $300 for it, and nobody's willing to buy it. And I said, well, I'll buy it. And he sent it out from Maine, and we put it in our very first Cody auction and brought $12,000.
Oh, my.
And that's the great thing about the auctions is we would have never known to ask that or even dreamed of asking that. If I would have put it on my table, I would have asked $450.
And what was it that made that piece so valuable?
Condition.
And maker?
Gottlich out of Miles City. And what happened is that was right at the beginning of when you got 3 or 4 people deciding it's time to start buying this stuff. And they're smart enough to know if you buy the best, that's when you pay the money. And it made gun leather take off for years. That was the beginning.
Holster that nobody would buy
Right.
for $350.
Right.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible? I find that incredible. That is how the art world works.
Right, yeah.
And something switch, some flips, and things, or people start to recognize quality or whatever it is. And so you now have your gallery going. It's the 80s. And you start the auction, the late 80s, now you start the auction. And so what happens from, say, in the 90s? So now you're into the 90s time frame. How did things transverse, and what happens with you?
It was just a really good time. It was the heyday of what we were doing. Everything was going fine. It was before the internet when things were rare. And after that came along, we found out things weren't as rare as we thought they were.
And what specifically were not as rare? Was it the guns, the spurs, the saddles, or just kind of everything?
Kind of everything, but it was the mediocre stuff. It was when eBay started. When eBay started, you could find mediocre material every day, whether it was books or art or anything like that.
And back then, they could sell guns, I think, too, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, because our auctions were up on eBay at one time, and you could sell anything out there. And what it taught people was, why should I be buying this stuff? There's too much of it out there. So you start rethinking what you're doing, and instead of selling $100, $300 saddles, you start selling that one $3,000 saddle or $30,000 saddle because it was easier.
The price started to be determined too, to some extent, right?
Oh, it was a price guide. Yeah, the internet became a price guide like it is now with books and everything. When I was buying rare Wyoming books for $300, it's because I only ever saw 2 copies in my life. And now you go to books and there's 530 copies.
So it's really depressed that market to some extent.
Oh, it has. That's why the best still sells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's still those rare books that you get that no one ever sees.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And do you do an internet search and go, okay, there's nothing here if it's one of those ones you've never heard or never seen?
Yeah.
And then you just kind of decide what price must be from that?
Basically, yeah. But that's why I love the auction business so much, is that it's in most cases, I'm not going to say all the time, but in most cases, it's a fair way to arrive at a price.
Yeah. Well, you have more than one person interested.
Right.
And they help determine the price. That's no doubt about it. Or not determine the price in some cases.
Yeah, it works both ways. It's if the right, if people decide they don't care about this stuff anymore, or if you get 2 people that, like we've been in that position where 2 people are drinking too much.
Is that why you give out the free liquor?
Yeah, they have fun.
And so in the 90s, it was a heyday, but then you start to see, I got my website up in 1996. By the 2000, things were really changing. eBay's going, and you start to see solidification, I think, of price structure to some extent, but not as much as it has later on, because you're still very active and busy. And now you're probably setting records every year, every auction, every...
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
And to me, I couldn't ever wrap my head around, still can't, all the different nuances of spurs, for let's just say, because that's one of them, because it has to do with maker, time, age, condition, rarity, and all that. How does one go about figuring that out in today's world, even?
Well, it's more about experience. You figure it out by, as long as you're traveling, you're constantly traveling, looking at things, looking at collections, going to museums, and seeing how much stuff really is out there. And this is where a network of people come in handy, where, you call and say, have you ever seen anything like this? The big thing is getting to know whether it's original. Yeah. Seeing enough of it to know that something's been changed or something. Because originality has more to do with it. It's the same I learned in the gun business early on. You take a $10,000 gun and you refinish it, you got a $500 gun. And it's the same with spurs or anything that we have. Once you alter it, it's not like cars where you can restore every single piece and it's worth more money. It doesn't work that way.
And do you see fakes and frauds that are being made of spurs?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've got a really nice collection of them.
Yeah. The hard way to learn, right?
Yes. Well, I've gone out specifically and bought a lot of things that I knew were fake so I could show people.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I've done that too on things. And say, this is why this isn't a Navajo rug, and let me show you why.
Right.
And I think sometimes by having those, it helps people to really understand if they can feel, touch, and go, oh, yeah, I see it now. Oh, lighter and different color, da-da-da. Mm-hmm. But is there an internet source other than maybe following your auctions to figure out price structure for these kind of things?
Not really, because it's all over the place. It's the same like you see in the art world. We just sold a bronze for, I think, $4,500. There's one up on eBay for $26,000. It's been up there for 3 years.
Yeah.
But if somebody's just doing an internet search, that's what they're going to see.
Yeah, we see that, and they all the time. Well, there's one up on eBay that's like, and it's like, yeah, well, it may be up there, but there's also pieces of pie for $10,000 up there that look like, an animal. And being up on eBay and actually selling on eBay are two different things. And an actual auction that goes through with the price is it kind of sets the market for that. I do find it hard to understand the spurs and the saddles and the things. I know certain makers and marks are very important. Which are some of the best makers and marks for those kinds of things that people would want to know?
Well, like spurs, the most popular are the known names like G.S. Garcia and people like that people know.
Kelly and...
Yeah, Kelly and Crockett, they know that. But those aren't the rarest ones. They mass-produce things. They made a lot of material. You get Madueno and all these other great California makers that didn't make so much stuff. But people don't know the name when you talk to them, only certain collectors do. So, if you take a pair of Crockett spurs and put them next to a pair of Boone spurs, everybody's going to think the Crockett's are worth more money, and they're not.
Because of rarity.
Yeah, exactly, the rarity. But and a lot of it has to do with, it's been an argument between Texas collectors and California collectors. Why would people spend money on these ugly Texas spurs that are just iron with a little piece of silver when you can get a beautiful, fancy pair of spurs in California? And what it comes down to is historic, rarity and historic. These guys in Texas were building these spurs in the middle of nowhere on some ranch with a hand-fired forge. And they only made 10 pair because it took them 2.5 weeks to make them. And the guys in California had a big factory in San Francisco. So, they level each other off. And so then you have to get down to the condition and the rarity of each one.
So which are worth more? Is it Texas or California, or is it case-by-case basis?
It's case by case. Yeah, you can get a great pair of Maine and Winchester spurs that'll bring $25,000. Then we sold a pair of Boone spurs last year for $32,000. It's all about, comes down to the rarity of, as with anything, of how many pieces have you ever seen in your life.
And what's the most expensive pair of spurs have sold, do you know?
Well, publicly versus supposedly privately is a big thing. And publicly, I'd say we're probably looking at about $225,000, I believe, for a pair of spurs that belong to a very important person and were a phenomenal pair of spurs on their own. And then, but the majority of really good spurs are in the 25 to 50 range. There's not a
25
lot.
to 50,000, so
Yeah.
people know.
Yeah.
But not to say you couldn't get a great pair of spurs from the 20s for $1,500 either.
Oh, definitely. There's
Yeah.
a lot of those out there, and that's the great part of it. There is an entry level on here. You can collect Berman spurs, which are really great, true cowboy spurs from the 1870s, 1880s, and you can buy those for $300.
Yeah.
So you can get interested in collecting.
Now, one of the things you've gotten into, too, is not only the Western early historic stuff, but you also do things that are Hollywood-related, Roy Rogers, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that market, 'cause that's a totally different market, I would think.
It is. It's completely, it's a very different market because it's a grouping of people that grew up at the right time, watching Roy, watching Gene, these kind of things where they grew up. They made a success of themselves. So you've got the right age group of people that have become successful and they have the money to buy what they want. And that's what drives the market. My opinion is it's going to be a very short-lived market because these people are getting older. And it's still there. We just sold the Lone Ranger saddle for $162,000, the one that was used by Clayton Moore in the TV series.
And what was the estimate on one like that? Do you remember?
30 to 50,000.
Yeah, so it made 3 times the high estimate.
Yeah.
And why was that, do you think?
We always try to put when we do estimates, it's based on past things. You can't just guess. They are all educated guesses, anyways. But you got to be close to what something else has done. So you can't really give a lot of credence to it because Clayton Moore wrote it. We estimated more at what it was worth as a true Bowline saddle. And then
So it was a great saddle with great provenance.
It was a $30,000 saddle that had really nice provenance. So.
And it took 2 people who wanted it or more.
Exactly. There was actually 6 people
That wanted it.
Yeah. And that market, we spent 3 years liquidating the Roy Rogers estate.
Did you ever get to meet Roy?
I did. I didn't meet him. I looked at him.
Yeah. How about Gene? How about for Autry, Gene Autry?
No.
I actually got to meet Gene Autry.
Yeah, I did. I've met
fun.
Jackie several times.
Yeah.
Not Gene.
Yeah, I did get to meet him. He came around one of the shows once I think we were doing it at something in LA or Autry, and it was for the Autry, and he came around and said hi.
Yeah, and these people were real heroes to these people, so they want a piece of what they have.
Though that will potentially be a big problem, I guess, 20 years from now for our kids who don't know who Roy Rogers is.
They don't know the names.
Yeah.
When I told a very well-educated man, when he walked in and looked at the Lone Ranger saddle, I said that was the one Clayton Moore rode. He said, never heard of the guy.
Yeah. Did he know who Lone Ranger was?
He did, because he had seen the movie with Johnny Depp.
Yeah. There you go.
So, that was, which, almost destroyed that market. So
That did? Why?
We sold Clayton Moore, who was the Lone Ranger, we sold his estate the day before the movie opened.
Uh-huh.
And everything went through the roof. It was great. Everybody loved their Lone Ranger. The movie did so poorly with people that loved their Lone Ranger that the market collapsed for a while.
Interesting.
It went straight down, and now it's back up again.
And I know some people did like it, but it was the true Western aficionados that didn't find it to their taste.
Yeah, they hated it.
Yeah.
Just a little too strange for them.
Yeah.
As somebody put it the other day, I was at a Western conference in Springfield, Missouri, and one of the speakers said it was a great comedy.
Yeah, it was different.
As long as you looked at it as a comedy.
I think maybe if you came from it at a different time frame, we knew what Roy Rogers, we knew what that was, as a Lone Ranger, I should say. And I think younger kids found it. I think they liked it. I think the younger generation did like it a lot.
Yeah.
But it's a different, but they would, maybe you'll be selling Johnny Depp memorabilia from that, later on. Maybe that's where that fills the void.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We hope that there stays an interest. It's fathers teaching sons or daughters, and.
Well, one of the most interesting things that I've seen go through your auction, and I think you would agree, is a great photograph that you had of Billy the Kid. One of 3, maybe? No,
it was one of 4 originally.
4.
Yeah. There was a quarter plate tin type, so when the photographer took the photograph, it would have made 4 images.
So 4 images of Billy the Kid, and most people know who Billy the Kid is out there, but for those who didn't, you might even tell them who Billy the Kid was. You'd be surprised. There's some people who won't know who Billy the Kid is.
Yeah, he became famous during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico. he was considered, because of the books that were written about him, to be a murderer, an outlaw, and what makes him intriguing is everybody's still arguing about that today. How many people he really did kill, how really bad he was he was more of like a Robin Hood figure. And then, of course, during the movies, they made more movies about Billy the Kid than anybody. And then when the Young Guns came out and these more modern movies about Billy, he became even more famous than he ever was. So from the fact they were writing books about him in the 1880s and movies about him in the 1990s, he's been famous for a long time.
And when did he die?
Would have been... How are you getting me on this one?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm just not my...
But 1880s time frame?
Yeah,
because when was this...
I know the exact date.
Yeah, I'm sure. When was this photo taken? Yeah, like I said, I pulled him out of his booth. When was that photo taken, the one that you sold?
It was taken in 78, I believe.
Yeah. So this is one of 4 images of Billy the Kid. It's that famous one. You'll see it everywhere. I mean, you've seen that. I mean, it's not a big image. How big is that? It was very small,
the size
right?
of a credit card.
The size of a credit card.
Yeah.
And how did that come into your possession?
It had been in the same family since the day it was taken.
Wow.
Billy handed it to one of his best friends, and his best friend put it in his pocket. And it stayed in that family until they called me and said that they wanted to sell it. It had been in the Lincoln County Museum for a few years. They got mad at the museum. There was a parting of the ways. They pulled it out of the museum and called me and asked me if I'd sell it for them.
And so I guess when you got that call, you actually go, oh, this is real because of the history.
I knew the family name immediately.
Yeah, you knew. Did you know the piece?
I knew the piece, yeah. The Upham tintype, that's, when he said, this is Mr. Upham, I knew exactly who it was.
Did your heart start to race?
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
And so this is a great piece. It's great at the Provenance. It's only one of 4 that are known, right?
Yeah, well, they've known that there's only one. The Upham was the only one that they believe existed. There's stories about them being nailed to walls, being lost.
So is this the only known?
It's the only known one, yeah. Everybody believes the other 3 were destroyed.
I see. So this is it.
Yes.
If you want an image of Billy the Kid, this is the one and the only one. So how do you price it?
We price it based on what historic photographs. We knew it was the best historic photograph to come up to auction, and the best one had sold for about $350,000. So we estimated at $300,000 to $500,000, based on what had been done in the past.
Yeah.
We believed that it was worth over $1 million. We did believe that, and.
But nothing had sold historically of that type for more than $300,000 at that point? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember. We were talking about this a little bit before, but I remember when I saw that, and I saw the estimate, and I thought, this is something that probably should be bought. Mm-hmm. Even though I've never paid that much for a photograph, I really don't know historic photographs, but the history seemed so compelling, and the fact you have one of one seemed like it would be something that would, how you're going to find another.
Exactly. Yeah.
And though it didn't quite make $300,000 to $500,000, what happened at that auction that day? What was that like?
It was really exciting, and we watched. There was, believe it was 12 people into $1 million, about 6 people into $1.5 million, and then 2 people into $2 million, and that was it. And it was.
What did it hammer for?
$2 million it sold for $2.3 million with the buyer's premium.
Yeah. And was the family in the room, or were they around?
Oh yeah, they were in the room.
Yeah, what were they doing?
They were high-fiving.
Yeah.
Yeah. The comment the next morning at breakfast when Mr. Upham looked at his wife and said, "Would you get me another cup of coffee?" She says, "Get your own damn coffee. I'm a millionaire."
Multi-millionaire,
exactly.
Actually. And so that must have been a whirlwind, because I would imagine every press in the country wanted a picture of it and wanted to talk about it.
Oh, I was pulled off to the side of the road several times. I was in Wagon Mound, New Mexico,
which is nowhere but beautiful.
On the side of the road, doing a live interview with Drive Time Scotland. It was on the BBC. We were in the New York Times. It was something.
And what did people want to know at that time? What was so interesting? Was it the price, the history? What was it?
They wanted to know why Billy was as famous as he was. Why was he, why did people decide he was famous? And a lot of it was New Mexico. New Mexico wanted him to be famous. New Mexico, the governor was interested in him. Everybody wanted to be. and they wanted to hold on to him as their big tourist draw.
He was for Fort Sumner,
Yeah.
which is where he was buried, and he was, that's just a very short distance from where I grew up in Portales, and, we all knew, Billy the Kid's buried there, and I think his stone got stolen half a dozen times, and I don't know, is it still there, or did they have to?
No, Sumner sold off pretty much everything.
Yeah. And so you get complete massive exposure throughout the world. So how many Billy the Kid knockoff looking objects came your way after that?
To this day, we still see a minimum of 2 a week.
Yeah. And they're old photographs often that they go, this is him, I know it is.
Yep.
And so how do you deal with it? How do you handle that kind of stuff?
It's gotten to the point because of litigation these days and saying things about people or objects, we just say it's not for us.
Yeah.
And we leave it at that.
Yeah, because if you say, no, this isn't Billy the Kid, even though you know it isn't Billy the Kid, and they go, no, well, it's worth $2 million and you just destroyed it, then you're in trouble.
We all take it, there are people out there that say, well, you don't want to find another one because it'll, take away the glory of selling the only one. And that's not true. This is how we make our living. We want to find more.
Sure.
And we want to find great ones. But they come out and people always do stories on them and they're in the paper all the time. There was a story about one last week in the New York Post. There's one that just
was supposed to be another Billy the Kid?
Yeah,
and what happens to those kind of things?
Usually they just drift away, quietly drift away, because people have made a claim, and then you get other people, other supposed experts that make claims, and when they're proven wrong, they just kind of quietly go away.
Have any sold since then as supposed Billy the Kid for big money, even though they may or may not be?
A lot of them have been offered.
Yeah.
And a lot of them people think they are. In fact, the story in the Post talked about the one selling for $5 million. Well, the one, it was offered at $5 million, but it's never sold because nobody believes it's Billy except for the person trying to sell it.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of that out there, and we see it constantly. My file on my computer that just says bad photos is getting to the point where I need another computer just to keep it.
But there must have been some pretty interesting things that came up too, because people go, this guy can get great amounts for outlaws like Jesse James and other individuals. Did you end up getting some of those things too?
Oh yeah, in fact in January in Mesa at our show at the Mesa show in January, we're selling the foremost collection of Western photographs in the world.
Wow.
We're selling the Bob McCubbin collection.
Oh yeah.
And we're talking 1,800 photographs. The Doc Holliday's graduation photo from dental school that he signed on the back. Things like that.
And that's going to be in Mesa and Phoenix?
Yeah.
Or Mesa, near Phoenix. And that's in January, like January 22nd-ish.
27th, I think. Yes, right in there.
And you also had some kind of Billy the Kid thing you got too, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, there's a collection of 1,800 photographs and 5 artifacts. And the artifacts are all special, and the best one is the knife Billy the Kid was carrying when he was killed by Pat Garrett.
Yeah, and that was near Las Cruces, going over Oregon Pass, somewhere in that region?
Yeah, and it was at the Maxwell Ranch. The knife has been in the Maxwell to Gonzalez family ever since it was dropped. It was handed to Billy to go cut a piece of meat. And he took the knife, walked into Maxwell's house, and Pat Garrett shot him. He dropped the knife. His so-called supposed girlfriend who had handed him the knife picked the knife back up. And it's been in the same family ever since. It's perfect provenance.
So since
which
1880.
Is important.
And what kind of knife is it?
Just a cheap $10 butcher knife, just a little wooden handled butcher knife.
But he had it and it was his.
Exactly.
And do you have an estimate on what that's going to bring?
Right now we're looking at probably somewhere around $700,000 to $900,000 right in there.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
That's a rare thing.
That's how important Billy is.
Yeah, and so when you got that call for the knife, did you know about it as well?
Oh yeah, I've known the knife for about 30 years now.
Yeah, so that was, and again, a very exciting component. So with this huge collection of historic photos, it's going to hit the market again in your high noon auction in January. Do you expect that will change the parameters of what photos go for of that type?
I would hope it would make people more interested in what they have, because we're looking at, it's not going to, like most things, it won't dilute the market, because we're looking at one-of-a-kind pieces. We're not looking at something that you can just go to the show and buy. You're looking at the best of the best. and the rarest. So if anything, it should attract a lot of interest in people starting to buy photographs again, really great photographs. And I think it'll attract more interest in these photos because, we've kind of gotten to the point where people don't understand how important early photography was and how historic this stuff is. So hopefully we'll get the word out there and people understand.
Were a lot of these that are going to be coming out, are they historic, importantly historic because of the individual that was photographed, or is it actually the photographer who took it, or a combination of both?
No, the photographer that took it at that time is not as important anymore unless you get into like William Henry Jackson or somebody like that.
Or one of those.
That is just, landscapes, things like that. When you're taking photographs of people, it becomes a person. We have photographs of people that people didn't know photos existed.
Like who?
Like James Beckworth, things that great early photographs, ambrotypes of mountain men. There's great tintypes, but mostly, photographs of like 14-year-old Jesse James, things like this. And what makes the McCubbin collection so important is Bob started collecting 55 years ago. And when he would buy a picture of, say, Pat Garrett, he bought it from Pat Garrett's son. So this is where everybody got their idea of who's who in the Western world, was because Bob was probably the leading researcher and historian, not only collector. So he made sure every time he found a photograph that you knew exactly who it was, that it came from the right person.
So he documented it.
He documented everything.
And how many? Is this going to be 1,800 photos?
Yeah, it's only going to be 300 lots. Because the important things, the 6 great top-of-the-line photographs of Wild Bill Hickok will each be sold separately, but the 10 street scenes of El Paso, Texas will all be sold together. Because
is it going to be its own separate day? Or
it'll be on Friday. We'll do nothing but photographs on Friday and artifacts on Saturday.
Yeah, so that's one worth going to. Wow.
Put
that one on your calendar,
bring in
folks.
a whole lot of people.
Yeah. I think I'll show up for that one. But just interesting.
Better.
I know, it's always tough. Anything else you want to tell me? I mean, you have had a very interesting life, clearly, with a lot of stuff I didn't know. But what's going on in the future for you, besides this? Obviously, you have an important collection, but what else?
Well, we're excited about Santa Fe. Our show, for the first time, we moved it from Fort Worth to Santa Fe this year.
That was in June, right?
And we went back to the old Cody dates, the 4th weekend in June. And we've streamlined the show, trying to make it easier for people to know that they could trust what they were buying, which is important in our business. And cut down from 180 dealers to 105 dealers. And it was gangbusters.
That's what I heard. I can
packed.
Honestly tell you that every dealer that I've talked to said it was fantastic, and it was, some of them said, like, oh, it's the old days.
Yeah.
And so we'll probably see that again next year.
Yep, 4th weekend in June next year. We're already going forward with it, and it's exciting for everyone because Santa Fe is a great place to come to.
Yeah, and you did that at the convention center, right?
Yep,
yeah.
I did.
I'm already going to put that on my calendar. I won't be in Hawaii this time. I'll come and see you.
You can run it. I'll go to Hawaii.
Yeah. Only if I get a lot of the profits. But I don't ever want to run a show like that. It's a lot of work. I mean, people don't realize when you put on these shows, so you do an auction, but you also have 105 dealers that you have to deal with, and all the personalities that go along with that. You have logistics, what's that like to run those things?
It's really, as somebody put it one time, it's like being the mayor of a town, because you have security, you have people, you have to deal with the infrastructure, the everything. You pretty much have to run everything from scratch because every year is a new year. And Santa Fe was great because we live here, so of course that made it a lot easier on us. But it's an extremely hard thing to do. That's why a lot of shows do struggle, and even our shows, struggle certain years when things are bad. You just have to find your way out of it. You have to figure out, how do you attract younger people? How do you get the collectors to get interested again? What makes them exciting? And that's why Santa Fe this year was great, and why it's carrying over into other shows right now, because there was such a buzz. There was an energy. People were excited about things. I heard people bought things that they realized, why did I buy it later? Because they were excited at the time.
Yeah.
And that's good, and it's going to carry over. I already see the excitement at other shows that have been going on around the country. People are excited about buying again. And that's a good thing for all of us.
Yeah, part of it you think just has to do with the economy's doing well?
I think so. I think people are feeling a little bit different about it, yeah.
But our group of dealers, and you know better than anyone because you're dealing with them, they're all getting older as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you see many young dealers that are coming into the market? Are there any?
There are some,
Yeah.
not as many as we'd like, but we did in Santa Fe this year. We attracted 4, people that were in their 30s,
Yeah.
which to us is perfect.
Yeah. I think this is I hadn't really considered this, but what a great opportunity if you're somebody in their 20s or 30s, maybe even early 40s, to come into this business where you have the majority of people are older but are willing to give you information, because I think at the point of where a lot of these guys are, they really want to share and they want to see their trade and they want to see the art go forward. If you were wanting to find an area where you could dominate as a 30-year-old, I think this could be it. And you have all the ability of technology and understand how you can use that, which so many, I think, in our field don't. We clearly feel it's important to have an internet presence, Facebook, all this stuff, Instagram. And we have the Art Dealer Diaries. You also have a very good website. You clearly are involved in the internet. But, I think this could be a calling out, At some point, there's going to be somebody who will, Brian Lebel will need to pass that baton, and you've got...
Hopefully soon.
Yeah.
But I still love it. If I didn't love it, there's no reason to be
clearly
doing
you're
this.
doing another show. You just started another show.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're not too ready yet. So, thank you, Brian Lebel. And I would just
thank you,
tell
Mark. I
people
really appreciate
out there,
it.
if you have old Western material, I can assure you this is the guy. I've gone to him for years. He's very knowledgeable, very ethical, and he's a great guy. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I feel the same.
I'm
Thank you.
super happy to have you. Brian Lebel.
Thank you.